So as a reminder, this is um, the Konflux community architecture call. It's not um, it's not specific to Red Hat. It's just for the Konflux community. There's one topic on the agenda for this week that I brought up. There's a new task that's been proposed, and this is one that is it can be considered either a build or a release action. And that's not something that I think we've ever really considered in the past because it's been clear what needs to happen at build time or release time. But I was curious what perspective the community had, whether we should segment these, whether we shouldn't, and what criteria we should apply to tasks when we are trying to determine whether we might want to contribute them to build definitions or to like the release catalog. So as a brief overview to what this task is doing, um, it is taking a container image as input and using podman save to um, create a tar file from an image. So it's a way to enable certain release pipelines that might be desired that are not using container registries natively. Whether that's because access control can't be properly restricted for the desired container registry that you're pushing to, or maybe you are trying to make it available so you can load this image in a registry that doesn't have network access. There are multiple potential use cases for this type of flow, but is there a feeling for how folks consider this image or this task, whether it should be a build time action or a release time action? I had a brief conversation with Adam about it on this PR, and what like I feel like this falls within more of a build time activity, just because I like personally I think that release time activities shouldn't be producing artifacts. Release time activities might do more of a extracting artifacts or extracting, signing, copying. Um, so, are there any thoughts on this matter, Louis?
I guess my question wasn't clear from this is so once this task produces the OCI artifact, um, will that be used by QE or in any sort of testing, or is it never going to be looked at? Only going to be kind of like a pass through when it gets to the release side.
It's certainly possible that some that QE might be interested in testing it. I don't know what that flow would be, especially if the um, use case is for installing in network restricted environments. But I mean, you can have an integration test scenario that runs to load this image into some registry and make sure that specific test cases work without having access to a specific registry. Um, but that is an additional data point to include in these types of decisions, whether this is an artifact that might be want to be tested or is really just a or a way to represent the data. Another way that in talking with the author of this PR to introduce the task, another way that I considered representing it instead of how we have it here is with the task as it's written here, this would be its own component. Um, because it's producing a specific output. artifact that's producing an OCI artifact that's using Auras to upload the tar to the registry. Then at release time, that component, the corresponding release task would take as input this OCI artifact, download the blob, and then push it to whatever location it needs to be pushed to. Another way that we might, or that I think it makes sense to do it, is to, instead of pushing it on its own, is to add this as a task after an image build, and then it wouldn't do a Auras push, it would do a Auras attach. I think is what the command is, to attach it to the image using the refers API. Since this is an artifact that, yes, it's an artifact on its own, but it's tightly coupled with the container image itself. And like, I think if that's the intention, then that might blur the line even more, because it's saying that when you release an artifact, maybe what you're going to do is you're still going to release the component of the image that's produced, but in the release, you're not going to copy that image itself, but you'll do you'd use Auras or some other tool to download that blob and then push that blob. So you're releasing the image, but in releasing the image, you're actually releasing some other attached content. Bruno?
Yeah, so I have a couple of thoughts on this. So my first thought is that if we are looking at this from the point of view of needing provenance and making sure the supply chain for any artifacts is followed through from the beginning to the end, it would make more sense to have it as part of a build pipeline. But the worry here is that, as you mentioned, we currently don't have any mechanism to discover this artifact on its own. So the user would need to be very cognizant that they produce this artifact to be able to then release it. So right. Yeah, I think maybe attaching it to an image would make it go much more smoothly through the current workflow.
Yeah. Well, so attaching it, artifact discovery, if it's its own component, then the pipeline used to generate that component would be very simple, because the only process or the only tasks that you need would be, you don't even necessarily need git clone, because the only input that you need is the image that's produced. So it could effectively be a pipeline with a single task, in order to satisfy the input that's required for this. And so this image discovery would be it's produced and it's pushed to its own image repository location. The discovery is just that it's pushed to the registry. When using a OCI attach method, the discovery would have to be this OCI attach process sets a tecton result, which is the digest of that blob. So you can download the blob directly, so the enterprise contract can verify that blob was generated from a trusted task. So in either situation, you can discover the image either associated with the other artifact that's produced or on its own. Adam?
Yeah. So the conversation that we just had about attaching other artifacts to the image and wanting to release them, that makes sense to me. But when we look at this use case, this pull request specifically, the task just doesn't make any sense. What it does is it takes a regular, a perfectly good OCI image, and it turns it into this weird wrapper that doesn't really mean anything. It converts the OCI image into an OCI tarball and then attaches that. Well, it wraps that in another OCI manifest and pushes the whole thing to the registry. And upon seeing that, my question was, why? And I still don't understand why we would want that.
So I think that this isn't too dissimilar from what we do for pushing the VM disk images as well. So we have a process where the input is there's a boots image, and we want to convert it to a different format and then release that different format. The difference is that that process of converting a Bootsy image to a disk image, and which is just a tarball, is much more computationally expensive. And so it makes sense to do that on the build side of things, because then you might also want to test it. You might want to try and take this ISO or this raw disk image and do something with it, see if you can provision a VM with it. But at a high level, you're taking this artifact. In both the cases, you're taking a container image and you're converting it to a different format. It's just that it takes a little bit more, and it takes a little bit more configuration. It takes a little bit more compute and configuration for the Bootsy image.
So in the Bootsy case, we convert a container image to an ISO or something like that, right?
Yeah.
But in this case, we take an OCI image and we convert it into an OCI image again, but just wrong.
Well, so what we do is we take a container image and we convert it to a tarball, and then push that tarball to an OCI registry, because the OCI registry can it doesn't have to only contain container images.
Right. But the use case here is that you, after release, you want to push the container image as a tarball to some CDN. But you can do that without this extra step of converting a container image into a container image in an OCI manifest.
How would you do it in a different way?
Well, in the release pipeline, you use Scopio to pull the image. That gives you an OCI tarball, and you push that tarball.
So it would be a similar thing to what we're doing here with podman save. It's just doing podman save within the release pipeline instead of at the build side.
Yeah, pretty much. Because the build already gives you the OCI image that you want. There's no need to create the tarball right away. You can get the tarball anytime you want.
Yeah. So one thing that might be limiting in that situation is that you won't have any provenance that includes the digest of the tarball itself, because the tarball, it's not pre-computed. You're generating the tarball at release time, and if there are any requirements where you need to associate provenance to this artifact that's being downloaded from a content delivery network, you wouldn't be able to associate it. Whether that's a problem or not, I'm not trying to say it is a problem. I'm just saying it might be a limitation. Mikola, did you have a comment?
Yeah, so basically many stuff was just covered by Adam and you, but so what I wanted to add here, and what's my concerns, that in this case, if I understood correctly, we are producing two like artifacts. One is regular container image, and second one is OCI artifact proposed by this task. To me, it's overhead, and we should solve the problem in the right way. So if we need to produce tarball, ISO, QCall, or whatever, that should be the result of the build pipeline. So if we don't need the image as it is, we shouldn't produce it, and then we will solve issue with provenance, because we would produce single artifact like ISO, QCO, whatever, and it would have all the stuff in it, provenance, signature, whatever. So to me, it would be the right way to produce it immediately, because if we target QCO, we produce it without, proxying via image and stuff like that. That's just my opinion.
So for this, the container image would still be critical if you want to be able to run build time tests against it, because our build time tests don't support running against a tarball of a container image.
I'm afraid that that's problem of the tests, but not the build. So if tests doesn't know how to test tarballs, that's problem of the test, not of the build, because build just produced what's desired, tarball, right?
Right. And so what I'm trying to say is that even if the tar is that required file, it is likely to still be it's likely to still be required to produce this additional artifact, which is the container image itself, just because that's going to be much easier to test and run. Whether we want to add functionality to support running CVE or running Clariscan or ClamAV or any of those other tasks that we have in the build pipelines by default. Whether we want to support tar, running those on tar, I think that the answer to that is likely going to be no, because we already have a perfectly viable way to run against container images. We have a container registry. And so it's not just a matter of what you're producing to figure out for the release action, but it's a matter of what are you producing, how do you need to verify it, and then what are the intended release actions that happen after. So for this, like if what you are suggesting is to have a separate build task, and maybe this isn't what you're suggesting, but what I don't think we should do in this situation is have a separate build task which does the clone from the clone and prefetch, then produces an image and doesn't push it to the container registry, but instead just pushes the tarball. That I would say it would be less desired. I think what the more desired path would be for this is to suggest to the author of this to use a new model of attaching this artifact to the produced container image. Then we can have the CVE verification, or we can have declare, ClamAV, all their verification done against the container image as we support today, and then have that tight coupling between the container image and the tar artifact, which will eventually be released.
Well, since we are producing container images we do today, and all the scans, all the provenance, and all the stuff like targeting produced image, not tarball nor OCR artifact. So why not we just use produced already image and convert it to the needed format later? Because anyway, all the scans are done from the image, and with this we still cannot be sure that the tarball has correctly scanned, because like the same like provenance. So we would have provenance only for the image, not for the tarball if we use this task. The same for the scans. They will be scanning image, but not the tarball. And
So
there is no guarantee, you know. Well, it's my opinion.
we would be able to establish that certainty if we have the ability with an enterprise contract policy that ties this blob that's being released as, or this blob that we want to release that's an output of a task, to the input of that task, which is another container image, and that task is a trusted task. So I think that we would have to have the ability to, for an enterprise contract, to verify, here's the input to a trusted task, it produces this specific output. This output is what we want to release. And then we would have confidence that this task is trusted and it takes the input, the image reference, and modifies it in a supportive way to produce that output.
Yeah, go on, Louis.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think if I had a component that required this to be done, and I came across an issue that with how the artifact was created, if this was only done at release time, it would be really difficult for me to debug this. Which makes me think that this kind of stuff should really be on the build side, so I can easily iterate on it. I can debug this from a pull request and things like that.
Well, to me, it doesn't look right if we produce duplicates of the same artifact at the build. So we can do that certainly, but so we need to employ all the pipeline and all the checks for that. And like duplicating it looks a bit weird to me. So the same as Adam said.
What are you concerned about duplicating specifically?
Like that we produce the image and then OCI artifact with the same image basically. So it looks like a duplicate on build side. And since we are not, it would be okay if we were producing 2 artifacts. That's fine. But then every artifact should go through, build and verification pipelines to have all the security scans, provenance, and stuff. So
yeah, the with the task as it's written today, as I mentioned, the artifact, or you would have 2 components, one producing the container image, the other producing this tarball. Using this model, you would have to ensure that you verify each artifact independently. That also, the challenge with that is that what is the verification of a tar artifact other than a verification of what was hard to produce it? And then you also have an added complexity of maintaining these 2 components and their tight coupling. Do you want to, like, would a user want to have to handle component nudging? And any on-cell expressions that they need to configure in their pipelines as code configuration to prevent excessive builds? Or would it make sense to just, like, to me, what it makes more sense to do is produce your container image, generate this related artifact, associate with the referrers API. I don't know the details of the referrers specification, but we're effectively saying, here's an artifact that's tightly coupled with this other artifact. And then we can download that artifact directly after verifying that the container image has been properly verified and validated. And then on release time, what we can do is, if the release action that we want is to copy this tarball to some external location, if we're not additionally releasing the container image, maybe what we want to do is tax off this container image to some other known location so that we don't lose that raw container image and all the attestation information that was generated with it as well. And you have the tight coupling there, without having to add additional configuration to a release plan admission that's saying this other image is actually a base image. You have to add all the references to the SBOM as well. But I think I think it would be a very heavy lift to make the disk image task use a similar refers API model. But that actually, it's interesting if we were able to use that same model for disk images too. You produce a Bootsy container, and you have additional tasks which generate these disk images and use the refers API and attach it. And then when you release the Bootsy image, you can push that Bootsy image directly, and you can have additional tasks which extract those raw disk images or the QCOW images, the ISOs, and do additional release actions on those.
So since you were mentioning the release, so we basically take the same image and just release it in different forms, right? So then it looks like a release stuff if we wanna have just different forms of the same artifact. So it's built. We've got the build thing in build pipeline, and then we can push it to, I don't know, some OCI registry, some store for QCOW or ISO or whatever. So build pipeline produced the build, what's intended to do. But build pipeline, in my opinion, shouldn't, creating duplicates or other forms of this. So I don't know, to me it's maybe looking more like release stuff.
Louis,
Yeah, I know we are like saying the opposite. Okay.
Yeah, no, I just want to call that for what it's worth. Koji, when you build things in Koji, and you build like an OS, you will definitely produce one build will produce multiple formats of the same thing that you built, because it makes sense to consume that artifact in different ways. So I think producing just in one format, I don't think that's necessarily something that we should aim for. We should aim for producing whatever formats will be consumed as.
yeah, and Louis, I also thought the point you made earlier was important, that this is an artifact that's being released. It's much easier to verify, validate, troubleshoot what might be wrong with the artifact if we produce it at build time and then just do a simple copy at release time. But I think that I don't know how Koji has these related artifacts or how it associates these related artifacts. But if there is tight coupling between various things, I think that it might be better to identify a way within Konflux to tightly couple them by more than just metadata, by more than just, oh, these are from the same repo, the same commit. that maybe it makes sense to figure out how to associate these more directly, whether it's additional formats we can use the refers API, or if there is a way to produce multiple artifacts from the same pipeline, then there's some other way to associate these artifacts as being together, built from the same commit, that built from that same event or the same pipeline. Louis?
Yeah, I think I just want to clarify something. So the referrals API is great and it's great for discovery, but it's not something that there's no guarantees that something that's associated with an artifact was done the right way. Like, and you can easily post build associate new things with it. There's no like sort of signature that creates that linking. So I think it's convenient and we should use that. But I think especially on the EC side, when we're validating things, what we usually do, and right now it's the best we can think of with what we have, is a task that emits an output, a result that says, I produced this thing and here's the digest. And then EC can verify that. So because it's in the tecton result, it ends in the source of provenance. So we use the source of provenance as a way of linking these things together. It's a very secure way of doing that, but it's kind of annoying if you have to use that to discover things. So just something to just want to clarify that point, because it's not obvious at first.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I know that EC does it for SBOMs that are produced. I am curious if we need to generalize it to make it easier to use this model for enterprise contract, instead of, we have this SBOM we're producing, EC needs to verify this specific result. We're now attaching Claire scans, EC needs to be able to verify this specific result. Whether there should be some pattern around, this is the result that enterprise contract is able to verify as an output based on the image that it's being referred to, that it's an input to a trusted task. So if we can make if we want to support the referrers API and validating the referrers API generically from enterprise contract, can we add functionality that there's a specific task that adds to the referrers API, and enterprise contract can say, here's a result. I see that it points to a blob that is a referred to artifact for this input parameter. And now this blob digest is trusted.
Yeah, we can definitely do something like that. There's the one thing that comes to mind is the time of check versus time of usage thing. So if we can definitely say, everything that's attached to the image, actually we can trace back to the build pipeline and it was done properly. But there's a window that after you do that check, something could change, and EC we wouldn't be able to catch that. So we just have to be careful about things like that.
Right. And I don't think that EC should say we verify everything that is using the refers API, but EC should be able to, or the model would be, I want to do something with this digest, or I want to be able to do something with this result for this task. Is it a trusted digest?
Yeah, I think this is a different conversation. It's a good one, but I think we might be better off to split that up into a different topic.
So I think as a result of this conversation, I've been convinced that this is a built-out task. but I don't know if other people have been convinced or if the criteria for build time versus release time task is clear in people's minds. Does anybody disagree that this is a build time task? No, it probably makes sense to have ADR.
Just for the I came in assuming it was a build time task. I missed the discussion, but just wanted to say that.
All right. I guess I'll try and write up an ADR.
Thank you, Andrew.
All right. Thank you, everybody. There's 20 minutes left. I don't know if there's anything else on the agenda. There is not. Does anybody else have anything? All right. We'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.